At this time, I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. And the first thing I want to do is, Governor Martinez, is your testimony, you talked about the fact that there are more than 800 applications for permits to drill in Mexico at a cost of approximately $1.9 million to New Mexico and $3.4 million to the federal government per day. And I think you wanted to say that that it takes an average of 250 days. That's $850 million just on the federal side. And the reason I bring that up is that I've been here, what's today, the 27th. I've been here 3 years, 1 month, and 21 days. And one of the first things I pushed was opening up federal lands for energy. We are an energy superpower. There's no question about it. Federal government has tremendous resources, and I bring this up in the context of infrastructure because I think a gas tax is the revenue source of diminishing returns. Governor Otter made this point about the fuel efficiency that we're achieving, and we continue to want to do that. Everybody wants more fuel-efficient vehicles. So when you attach a gas tax, you know that that is a revenue source of diminishing return. What I think might be more helpful is if we take your testimony and this whole permitting thing, expedite this, get it down so that we not only can shorten the amount of time it takes to take advantage of a lease, but increase the royalties. We haven't increased the royalties on federal energy resources since the 1920s, and direct a portion of that into the Highway Trust Fund for infrastructure. We could set it up on a system where there could be matching money for the states and let the states manage it. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, thank you very much for that question and the comment. I think it's very important to understand that New Mexico is really a gem within the country, not only for energy independence for the country, but also the revenues that it generates. For petroleum, there are so many products. It's not just for vehicles.
That's
and
right.
Gas is not just for vehicles. I mean, what products use the petroleum? And if we took that out of every product that we see and touch every day, we would be shocked to know how much of that is used in a variety of products. Under the previous administration, it was better to say nothing to the private industry, not to give permission or to deny it. Under my previous administration as a governor, the same thing. It was easier to say nothing, which cost people money to have something sitting there. We had some of these permits sitting there 3 years when I entered into office. So there was a quick move of going forward and backwards for every permit coming in the door and everything that was sitting there. To be able to have the revenues that allow us for education, allow for special projects, infrastructure projects that we have, and our permanent fund. We have a permanent fund that's one of the healthiest ones in the country because of oil and gas. Just in case, when it was developed, we ran out of oil and gas. But because technology is so great now, we're able to actually produce more and make it more available so that we're not relying on countries that are in such turmoil.
Well, it's been reported that there's a formation out west in western Colorado, southwestern Wyoming, and northern Utah, the Green River Formation, that holds 3 trillion barrels of recoverable oil. That's 3 times what the entire world's used in the last 100 years. I don't want to stay focused on that. I want to talk about some of these other issues and a more collaborative effort between state and local government. I think that's a legitimate discussion, particularly since my brother's a county engineer, and on how we can work on infrastructure together on the permitting. What we've seen over the last few years is just an enormous drag on infrastructure and really on the economy because of permitting. The infrastructure is so important to the economy. I'd like to get some feedback from each of you on how you see we could improve that process, maybe let the state and local governments do more of the work in a collaborative way, as you talk about, Governor Herbert.
Well, thank you. Again, I come from local government. I was a county commissioner for 14 years. I participated with NACO on many things. We railed against the federal government when I was there about the unfunded or underfunded mandates would come to local government. So the issue still is here. It's always probably going to be here, but at least we ought to be cognizant of it. In Utah, we in fact invite, they have an association for the cities called the League of Cities and Towns. They come, we have 245 of them that they represent, the cities of the state, 29 counties, part of our Utah Association of Counties. They are probably the most active people on the Hill during the legislative session to make sure that what we do, they get input, they're invited. We equalize our educational funding in the state of Utah so that if you're in a rural part on the Navajo Nation, that you get as much education funding as you do if you're in the middle of the urban heartland of the state of Utah. So we try to respect, all the local government and their subdivisions and make sure that they're part of the decision-making process in the state of Utah. Again, a lot of it's just an attitude. We're saying we're not going to make decisions at the state level until we've got input from the local levels. And some of that we devolve down and let them say, you know what, that's a county issue. In your county, you take care of it. That's a city issue. Your city, you take care of it. And the state will stay out of it.
Okay, in that regard, and this is my last question, we've talked a good bit about strengthening state and local consultation requirements of reforming the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act and to help restore the state's partnership with the federal government. What I want to know is how important are these types of reforms, and are there other possible areas for reform that Congress should be looking at to improve the relationship or communication between the federal government and the states? And each of you can answer that, and we'll be done.
Mr. Chairman, let me begin by saying we learned a lot about ourselves during the recession between 08 and 10. And what we did was what almost every Idaho family did, is they sat around the breakfast table when the work ran out for Dad and said, what things do what is necessary and what is nice? To find out what is necessary, we looked to the Constitution. And the Constitution was pretty specific about an education system for the state of Idaho and other areas. And then we said, well, what is nice? If we haven't got the money for nice, we're not going to do those things anymore. And so I think at every level of government, especially when you run into a time like the Great Recession, like the recession was, that's the process that you have to go through. And even further than that, after the recession, we didn't go back to the old ways of doing things because we learned there were a lot of things that were simply not the proper role of government.
Thank you. Governor Martinez.
I completely support that. Having inherited the largest structural deficit in the history of our state, I have not raised a tax once. And they can call it whatever they want, revenue enhancements, whatever it may be. We've not raised a single tax, but we actually become competitive with our surrounding states, which didn't exist for a very, very long time. It was believed doing the same thing over and over again where we're going to get different results, and we didn't. We became competitive, and we've actually recruited companies and businesses to New Mexico because we're doing it different. However, now we're turning over an amazing budget. We have a surplus, we have great royalties, we have a permanent fund that's outstanding. But I hope that the next governor doesn't see it as a way to start a spending frenzy and in growing government back to where it used to be, which was absolutely unnecessary. Way too many employees to actually complete the mission of the state. And so that's what we've done, is reduce our actual government size to fit what was necessary for us to deliver the services that are required.
Thank you. Governor Herbert.
I'll just finish by saying this. You've heard me say this already, but all 435 members of the House, all 100 members of the Senate, the President should always ask the question, is this an issue, something that should be better addressed at the state level? That should be the beginning of every discussion. And there'll be differences of opinion, but many times you're going to say, you know what, that probably is going to be better and more effectively addressed at the state level. Let them take on that responsibility. We would welcome that. And I think that's a bipartisan approach, by the way, of that feeling. Thanks for hearing us today.
Well, I thank our witnesses again for appearing before us today. I think this has been an excellent hearing and very constructive.